For me, it just means it's just an absolute certainty that the price of uranium is going to go way higher and stay up way longer than what people believe. And so it's going to become a sector that people want to have a little bit in their portfolio. This was sort of my second swing at a uranium bull market. Back in my Sprott days, I think it was around 2003, I first met with Cameco. They're one of the largest producers of uranium in the world. And they had come into our offices because they were selling off a gold asset, Cantera. And I started looking, that's what got me looking at uranium because it's such a small, unique market. Nobody really gives a shit about it. And that's what makes it so special is I say it's the weirdest commodity market because no one cares about it. It's so small, but yet it's so essential that the industry that consumes it will pay almost anything for it when it's in short supply. So at the bottom of the bear market in uranium, which was basically March of 2020, and similarly, it got to a similar size. Like we're talking $7 to $10 billion maybe. And you got to remember, this is an industry that provides 11% of global power, like it's of electricity, not power. But it's massively important, and the reason why nobody cares is the industry enters into long-term contracts with miners. Typically, they mess around in the spot market, and during the bear markets, they just sort of rely on spot market, don't contract, and they sort of pick off weak pounds and cheap pounds. But if you think about the price of electricity, $100. So uranium's around 58, 59 today. It could move up $100 and only add about half a cent a kilowatt hour to the cost of uranium power, of nuclear power. It could have very, very dramatic moves. And last cycle it went from, you know, I think the industry went from, say, I'm going to make up numbers, but somewhere around like 7 billion to 70 billion, maybe more. The price of uranium went from a very low of $7, $8 a pound. I got involved around $11 a pound and could see a shortage developing and said, I don't know if it's going to be 5 years or 10 years, but it's going to go back to its inflation-adjusted highs, which will encourage production and supply the industry again. And that number was targeted to be around $140 last cycle. This cycle, we're starting in the low 20s. Because of COVID, there was a good supply shock. Cameco and Kazatomprom, two of the largest producers, shut down production as well as some other minor producers due to COVID. It started a supply shock. And at the same time, we had other dynamics at play, which ultimately I say it's going again to the inflation-adjusted high. This time it'll be 200, maybe even higher by the time this bull market stops. One of the reasons why I became bullish on the sector as a whole is because of the decision by most of the automakers to say we're going to go basically all electric vehicle production. You've got world leaders like Elon Musk, out there saying, we just need to double the electricity output of the world in the next 20 years in order to facilitate electric vehicles. And for people like me that like to do math and look at resources and look at what are the demands? What are we going to have to produce to achieve that? It's mind-blowing. The amount of copper that goes into vehicles, transmission lines, like just to try to imagine we're going to double the global grid over 20 years. You just start looking at the different metals involved in the batteries and the specialty metals in there. And then on the whole, you look at the electricity market and you're like, okay, well, what's going to be the fuel source of, this doubling of the grid? And at the same time, we're trying to fight climate change. It's like, how can you fight climate change and increase the grid by double over the next 20 years? You're going to try to reduce coal? Like the numbers are mind-blowing. And the people who are I'm pro-solar, I'm pro-wind. I actually created a company called Sprott Power that we built up and sold. It was wind and some small solar projects in Canada. Very bullish on the sector. It's great in the right location, in the right, right wind regime, the right sun, the right climate. Great. It's a great addition. But you need to have a storage solution if you're going to, you can't get your solar at night. A lot of places the wind dies down at night. or you get into spells where you don't have enough wind, and then it creates trouble for your grid. And once you start adding in storage solutions, the return on energy invested in that sector goes way down. And so when I look at the numbers, you got 11% of global power comes from uranium. In Ontario, where I live, we're about 50%. Some countries are fully in, others are barely in, but I think that we're going to try to go to probably 30% of our grid, which is doubling apparently over the next 20 years, even though it won't be achieved, by the way. We won't be able to double the grid in 20 years. It's not going to happen. But best efforts will be to do that. And I sort of foresee that we're going to try to increase the nuclear power industry probably by 5 to 6-fold. And when you look down to uranium now, you're like, okay, well, the uranium industry doesn't even produce enough uranium today. We've been working off inventories and oversupply that was built up because of the rapid shutdown, like that initial shutdown of all of Japan's reactors post-Fukushima. That created this massive oversupply and inventory build for years. And so we're still working that off. We're way short on, supply, primary supply versus current demand. And we're going to try to exponentially grow the industry. For me, it just means it's just an absolute certainty that the price of uranium is going to go way higher and stay up way longer than what people believe. And so it's going to become a sector that people want to have a little bit in their portfolio. Why does nobody care? Why did this industry get abandoned? And it's very simple. The brokerage firms around the world that cover stocks, there was just no money in it. They're not going to pay an analyst, to look at a little sector that isn't doing M&A, the stocks are illiquid and barely traded. They're not capital raising because nobody wants to give them any money. And so it's just completely ignored until such time as it starts to grow, which it has. And then the little brokers, right? The little brokers that focus on resources get in there. And then bit by bit, the bigger companies bigger brokers get involved. And ultimately, what happened in I believe it was in the late 60s and early 70s, energy companies, the big oil and gas companies, and some of the big mining companies decided, whoa, this is the future. Like there was forecasts back then that nuclear was going to be this massive contributor to global power. And then that got sort of derailed by the 3 Mile Island incident. And that put a chill on everything. And, of course, cheap gas. So I think the same cycle is going to happen again where, whether it's the Exxon Mobils or the Shells or whatever, they're going to be coming at this thing and saying we might as well own one of these big, mining operations or be involved in the sector in some capacity. Well, basically, I took a view that everybody is going to change and go pro-nuclear. And the underlying reason why is money. We need power. We're plugging in electric vehicles. Demand keeps going up all over the world, and high prices change attitudes. When there's cheap gas and cheap alternatives, no one cares. And the other big driver is going to be the environmental side of things. The idea that gas is going to be a transition fuel is ludicrous. We're setting up for decades and decades of massive, massive gas consumption and massive, although lower, still massive CO2 production. I mean, it's not green. It's so far from green, it's not even funny. And still, to this day, we have increased coal burning around the world. So despite all the efforts, all the money and massive effort into solar and wind, we're still burning more coal every year. We're still burning more gas every year. And the only way, when you actually sit down and do the math, the only way to try to provide price stability and deal with inflation and provide stable power for industries is to go big into nuclear. And on top of it, it's definitely the only way we're going to fight climate change. Like if you believe in climate change, you've got to be a big supporter of nuclear because it's so much better than coal and gas. Like it's just not even close.